Hi guys, welcome to today's video. Today's video is going to be my January reading wrap up. So these are all the books that I read in January. I'm very proud of myself because I read 8 books in January, and that's the most amount of books I've ever read in 1 month. So I'm really excited about that. So yeah, I'm basically going to go through all the books and give my rating and some thoughts about them. First, I'm going to show you guys some statistics based on my reading this month. I use Storygraph to track my reading instead of Goodreads just because I feel like it's better honestly in every single way, and I honestly recommend you guys switch from Goodreads to Storygraph because I think it's a lot better. So I read 8 books, which equates to 3,460 pages. My top moods were emotional, adventurous, tense, dark, and hopeful. And then my top genres were young adult, romance, dystopian, and fantasy. And my average rating for this month was 3.63 stars. Okay, so now I'm going to get into the books that I read this month. So I started January off by reading Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Aguirre Sanz. This book follows 2 Mexican teenagers who are basically struggling with coming to terms with the fact that they are gay, and they're basically exploring themselves and finding themselves, and it's really cute. I honestly thought it reminded me a lot of On the Edge of 17 for some reason, even though it literally is not like that movie at all. But I do recommend this book for any of you that are in the LGBT community or are questioning if you're in the LGBT community, because I feel like this really portrays relationships in a really real way, and coming to terms with that kind of thing can be difficult, and I really the way it was described in this book was really true, real. I ended up rating this 3 stars. I can't really remember a lot of it, but I know that it was a good book, and I know that I cried a little bit at the end. So overall, it was a pretty good book. Next, I read Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. After I read this, firstly, I thought it was going to be 5 stars, but I've reduced my rating to 4 stars. This is basically told from 3 different perspectives. So the first perspective is told from Tova's point of view, who is a mother who lost her son, but they're not sure exactly what happened. It was ruled as a suicide, I think, but they're not for sure what happened. And it's also told in the point of view of Cameron, who doesn't know who his father is, and he's trying to find his father. And then the last point of view is from the octopus's point of view. And so I thought this was a really unique premise, and I really love sea creatures, so I thought that I would probably really love this book, and I really did. I just wish that there was more coming from the octopus. It's very rare that you get the point of view from him. This basically shows themes of grief and loss and found family aspects, and I really enjoyed this book a lot. I rated it 4 stars. The writing was very beautiful, and I really cried at the end. The only thing that didn't make this a 5 star for me was it kind of was a little longer than I felt like it should have been. There were some parts that I feel didn't need to be in there, or just weren't very important. But for the most part, I really enjoyed reading this book. I love the characters so much. They feel like real people to me. I really did enjoy this book a lot. The next book I read was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I'm so happy that I read this book. This book was really, before I read this book, I did not think I liked fantasy. I would not read fantasy books. I would not even think about picking one up. But I saw this on Book of the Month, and so I decided to pick it. And so I read it, and it was so good. This is the book that got me into fantasy. So obviously I highly recommend this to anyone who's trying to get into fantasy, because the fantasy is very easy to understand. It's there's hardly any fantasy in there. This is basically a book about 2 rivaling journalists who are competing to get one job. This is during a war, and so the main character, Iris, has a brother who went to the war, and so she writes letters to him and puts them in her wardrobe, but they're not going to her brother. They're going to someone she doesn't know about. So basically that's the whole premise of this book. It's just exploring their journey together, and it's really good. I love the characters in this book, and the fantasy obviously was so good. I ended up rating this a 4 stars. This also actually made me realize that I actually do like enemies to lovers. I honestly always thought that enemies to lovers was not my thing until I read this book. But yeah, it basically made me love fantasy and enemies to lovers, and I highly recommend this book. So I love Divine Rivals so much that I had to go and get Ruthless Vows. I had to get this from Target. Obviously, it's the sequel to the last book. It was not as good as the first, I believe. I rated it a 3 stars. I just feel like it was really long, and in the first book, as I said before, the fantasy was really easy to understand, and in this one, it got a little bit more involved in the fantasy, and it got a little bit more complicated, which is fine. I just feel like it was a little bit harder to understand for me, coming from someone who hasn't read fantasy before. But I do feel like it was a really good wrap up to the sequel. Like, it was a really well written series. I did really like these books, and I do still highly recommend you to read this book after you read Divine Rivals. So the next books I read were part of my Reading My Best Friend's Favorite Books video, and this was the first book that I read in this. This is Shatter Me by Tarera Mafi. I ended up rating this a 3 stars. This is basically about Juliet and how she finds out that her touch is fatal to other people, like it makes people die pretty much. So she's basically sent to a psych ward where she meets this guy named Adam, and it's also during a war. So they basically are asking to use her as a weapon in the war. This book is just about like introducing us to the world. I rated this a 3 stars because it just felt really introductory, and like it was all the world building and character building, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like if I continue the series, the next books are going to be higher rated books for me. That's why I rated this 3 stars. But I do think I want to continue the series. This wasn't a bad book. I did enjoy it, and I do want to continue the series. So next I read Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. This I did not rate very well. I think we all know, if you've watched my last video, how much I disliked the Hunger Games series. If I'm being honest, I know this is really controversial, but I had to read this in order to read the last book, and I just really don't like the Hunger Games like as a book. The movies are really awesome, but I just feel like the books were really long, like so much longer than they needed to be. So getting through this was kind of a pain, and I was kind of just rushing to get through it. So I rated this a 2 stars. I honestly can't even remember what happened in this. I think we all know what the Hunger Games is about. I don't really want to talk much about this because I'm sure a lot of you guys like have read it or know what it's about. I didn't like it all that much, and I don't really remember it. So that's really all I have to say about this. Like, I feel bad giving this a 2 stars, but I'm not gonna lie about it, so. And then, of course, I read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, which is the last book in the Hunger Games series. This I also rated 2 stars. Like I said before, I didn't like reading any of the Hunger Games books. Like, this one especially was so long. Like, I feel like half of the stuff that happened in this book did not need to happen. The only part of this book I liked was Lucy Gray, and I didn't even like her that much. President Snow, he's literally insufferable. I can't stand him. The way he was thinking and not thinking that any of what was going on was messed up at all is just like, I just can't. I don't know why. I just hate him so much. Honestly, over anything, I just feel like this book was way much longer. Was much longer than it needed to be. I just feel like this book was much longer than it needed to be, and I did not enjoy reading it at all. Like, I was literally just rushing through it to get over with. So I feel really bad for rating this 2 stars, but that's just what I have to do. The next book I read was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This was the only book in that video that I really, really did enjoy reading. I rated it a 4 stars, which is not a bad rating, but it's just not quite a 5. This is basically about Achilles, who's in love with Patroclus, and they fall in love, and basically it's also during a war, and so it just basically tells their story of love throughout the war, and it's a Greek mythology based novel, and I really just loved the characters, and the writing was absolutely gorgeous in this. The ending had me sobbing. Like, the last 2 sentences or whatever it is, I was literally sobbing and freaking reading it over and over and over. It was so good. It's a 4 stars for me because the middle felt a little dragged out. During the war was kind of when there started to be way more characters introduced, and as someone who doesn't personally, I'm not really interested in Greek mythology, all of those names being introduced was really hard to like keep track of who everyone was. So at some point I just stopped like paying attention to the names other than like Patroclus, Achilles, Thetis, like all the main characters. If it wasn't one of those people, I wasn't really paying attention. So yeah, basically I really love this book, rated at 4 stars. I highly recommend that you read this. If you are interested in Greek mythology, I highly, highly recommend you read this. Even if you're not interested in Greek mythology, it's still like really educational and really a beautiful story, and I do recommend it. So those were all the books that I read in January. I am so proud of myself for being able to finish that many books in 1 month. For some of you, it might seem like it's not very much, but as someone who, I have 2 jobs right now and I'm going to school, so it's just a lot to have to keep track of and work on at the same time. So I'm very proud of myself for being able to do that. I did want to let you guys know that I am working on my Magnolia Parks reread for when the next book comes out this month. I'm so excited for the next book, you guys don't understand. And I'm not sure if I'm going to be doing a reading vlog of me rereading those books. I might, we'll see. But yeah, I just wanted to come on here and give you guys a January reading wrap up. Thank you so much for watching. I'm so excited to be able to do these videos once a month. I feel like that's going to be really fun for me to do, and to come back and look at how I really felt about these books and see if my opinions ever change. This is probably a pretty short video, but I feel like everything I needed to say was said. So I'm going to leave it at that, you guys. I hope you guys are having a great day or night. And if you guys want to subscribe, that would make me so happy. I am a new booktuber, so this is all very new to me, and I would just be so grateful if you guys could subscribe. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm so excited to do this in the future, and yeah, thank you guys. Bye.